I was cleaning flux off a silver plate when the television changed my life. PBS was running some ceremony at the White House, and I was about to mute it when the camera pushed in on two hands clasping together, the president's hand and a young woman's hand. And on that wrist, catching the light like it had been waiting 25 years to be seen, was a bracelet I had engraved in this very workshop the summer before Hurricane Katrina took everything from me. I made that bracelet. I carved the lotus. I etched 6 notes of a song into the silver with tools that are still sitting in my third drawer. My hands went still. The flux dripped onto the table, and for the first time in 25 years, my daughter was not missing. She was shaking hands with the President of the United States. Before we begin, I would love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me how you are feeling right now. In just one word. Your presence here truly matters to me. A quick note. Some details have been adjusted for storytelling and reflection. What matters most is the message this story carries. I stopped breathing the moment I saw the bracelet on her wrist. 25 years of searching compressed into 3 seconds of public television. The reporter was introducing her as part of some program about women rebuilding American communities, the kind of segment I usually let wash over me like background noise while I worked late. But something made me look up. A young woman in a charcoal suit. Mid-sentence about investment strategy. And there on her left wrist, catching the studio lights with every gesture, a silver bracelet with an engraved lotus flower. That morning had started the way. Every morning had started since 2005, 4:30. Workshop on Royal Street, French Quarter. The air still heavy with last night's humidity and the faint brass echo from the jazz club 2 doors down. I am Warren Sable, 62 years old, master engraver, and former naval engineer, widower, father of a daughter who vanished during Hurricane Katrina when she was 7, and adoptive father of a son who walked into my life 1 year later from the foster system in Baton Rouge. I opened the third drawer on the left side of my workbench. The bracelet sat in a chamois cloth, hand-engraved sterling silver, no wider than my little finger. I had made it in the summer of 2000. When Celine was 5, she watched me work the silver for 3 days. Perched on the stool beside my bench, with her chin on her fists. "Why do you hold your breath when you cut, Daddy? What song are you humming?" "That song. When the Saints Go Marching In." I hummed it every time I engraved, a habit from my Navy years when I would hum to steady my hands during precision work on ship instruments. Celine noticed before anyone else. She said it was our song, so I etched the first 6 notes along the inside curve of her bracelet. So small you would need a jeweler's loupe to read them. On the outer face, a lotus flower, because Celine had seen one growing behind our house on Esplanade Avenue and called it the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Something beautiful growing out of the mud, she said. A 5-year-old who understood metaphor before she understood multiplication. I made 2 bracelets. Identical, except for the inside inscriptions. Hers carried the 6 notes. Mine carried her birth date. Both shared the lotus, the silver gauge, and in the lower right corner of the stem, my maker's mark. A tiny anchor crossed with an engraving tool. No other silversmith on earth used that mark. I held mine that morning like every morning. Thumb across the lotus. Familiar grooves of the anchor. Then, back in the chamois cloth. Back in the drawer. Discipline. Routine. The architecture of a life that functions on structure because everything unstructured was taken by a hurricane. My phone buzzed. Text from Darius. 33 years old. The one who had turned my small workshop into Sable Heritage Crafts, a brand supplying handmade silver pieces to luxury hotels across the South. Dad, need your signature on the transition documents before the investor call Thursday. I have prepared everything. I looked at the message and did not reply. Something I had started doing more often. He called it growth strategy. I called it distance. I set the phone face down and picked up the burin. But that was morning. Evening was different. 8:45 that night. Still at the bench. Television on low, PBS NewsHour. Then the host said words that split my life into before and after. Our next guest is Nadine Olivier, Chief Executive Officer of Crescent Ventures. She joins us tonight from the White House, where she was honored as part of the Women Rebuilding America initiative. A woman stood beside the president, shaking hands for the cameras. 27, maybe 28. Sharp features. Precise posture. She wore a charcoal suit, and when her hand clasped the president's hand, the camera caught it. The bracelet. Silver. Left wrist. A lotus flower. On the outer face. I grabbed the remote. Rewound. Played it again. Paused. The image froze with her hand extended and the bracelet catching studio lights. I aimed my phone camera at the screen, zoomed until the pixels blurred, then sharpened. The lotus. The stem. And there in the lower right corner, so small most people would never see it, my maker's mark. The anchor crossed with the engraving tool. I opened the third drawer, took out my bracelet, held it next to the frozen image. Same lotus, same stem, same silver gauge, same position, on the left wrist. I zoomed further, past the lotus, toward the inner curve, where the bracelet wrapped around her skin. The angle was not perfect, but in the gap where silver did not quite touch her wrist, I could see the faintest trace of engraving on the inside surface. I knew what those marks were. 6 notes. The first 6 notes of our song. How many mornings had I held this bracelet and told myself the search was over? That 25 years meant she was gone. That hope was a cruelty I could not afford. How many reports from my private investigator had led nowhere? How many times had I opened that drawer and chosen discipline over despair? I opened my laptop, searched Crescent Ventures, New York headquarters, founded 2019, specialized in community reinvestment and infrastructure rebuilding. Recent expansion into partnerships with heritage craft businesses across the South. Heritage craft businesses. I pulled up my own company records. Partnership contracts. Investor agreements. The name appeared on the 3rd page of our current fiscal year documentation. Crescent Ventures had been Sable Heritage Craft's primary investment partner for 2 years. Quarterly strategy meetings. Joint client presentations. Shared revenue projections. Darius had attended every quarterly meeting as my representative. He had sat across conference tables from her. I had signed partnership agreements that included her name. For 2 years, I had been in business with the company run by the woman wearing my daughter's bracelet, and I had never once looked up from my engraving bench long enough to notice. I sat motionless at my workbench, staring at the partnership contract on my laptop screen. Garrett Security. Meridian Financial. Quarterly Review. No. Those were someone else's words. My screen read, Sable Heritage Crafts and Crescent Ventures. Fiscal year 2025. Strategic Investment Partnership. Darius Sable. Chief Executive Officer. Representing Sable Heritage Crafts. Nadine Olivier. Chief Executive Officer, representing Crescent Ventures. His name and her name on the same document. 12 pages of revenue projections and shared client strategies that I had signed without reading past the summary, because I trusted my son to handle the business while I handled the silver. I pulled up the meeting minutes from the past 2 years. 8 quarterly sessions. Attendance records showing Darius present at every single one. Nadine Olivier listed as lead presenter for Crescent Ventures in 6 of 8 meetings. 6 times my son had sat in a conference room with the woman wearing my daughter's bracelet. 6 times he had looked across a table at her wrist and either noticed the bracelet or did not. Either possibility terrified me. I rewound the PBS segment one more time, paused it at a different angle, where her wrist turned slightly toward the camera during a gesture. This time, I could see the inner curve of the bracelet more clearly. I pressed my phone against the screen and zoomed until the image distorted, then pulled back just enough for the details to resolve. There, along the inner edge, where the silver wrapped toward her pulse point, Tiny marks, evenly spaced, too precise to be scratches, too deliberate to be wear. I knew those marks the way a musician knows a melody from the first two notes. I had carved them with a number 4 burin on a July afternoon in 2000, while Celine sat beside me, eating a popsicle that dripped grape onto my workbench. 6 notes: do, re, mi, fa, sol, la. The opening phrase of "When the Saints Go Marching In." She had hummed along while I worked, getting the rhythm wrong and laughing about it. I told her it did not matter if she got the notes right. What mattered was that the song was ours. I gave her the bracelet on her 5th birthday, August 12th, 2000. She wore it every day after that. Wore it to school, wore it in the garden where she watched the lotus flowers, wore it to bed. Delphine had to convince her to take it off for baths. "It is waterproof. Daddy made it strong," Celine would argue. And she was right. I had made it strong. Sterling silver. Naval-grade soldering. The kind of construction that survives salt water and time and hurricanes and 25 years of being lost. 3 years later, Katrina took her. August 2005. The Superdome. Thousands of people crammed into a space designed for football, not survival. Delphine was injured in the crush near the medical triage area. I carried her to the field hospital, while Celine held my belt loop with her left hand, the bracelet flashing on her wrist every time the emergency lights strobed. Then the crowd surged, a wall of bodies pushing toward the exits. Celine's fingers slipped off my belt. I turned around and she was gone. Swallowed by the chaos of 10,000 desperate people moving in every direction at once. I searched for 6 days. Walked every corridor of the Superdome. Checked every shelter in the parish. Filed reports with every agency that existed, and some that had been invented overnight to handle the catastrophe. Delphine lay in the field hospital with fractured ribs and a punctured lung, whispering Celine's name every time she surfaced from the morphine. The doctors said Delphine might not survive. She did. But our daughter did not come back. Delphine recovered slowly over the following months. The physical wounds healed. The lungs scarred, but functioned. But she carried Katrina in her body for the rest of her life, the way the city carried it in its streets. She lived another 8 years, until 2013, when the complications finally took what the hurricane had started. I closed my eyes at my workbench and let the memory pass through me the way I had learned to let it pass. Not fighting it. Not holding it. Just letting it move like weather. Then I opened my eyes and looked at the frozen image of Nadine Olivier on my television screen. Her hand extended, the bracelet on her wrist, my maker's mark on the stem of a lotus flower I had carved for a 5-year-old girl who believed beautiful things could grow from mud. I had hired a private investigator in 2006. Frank Hebert came recommended through a colleague, based in Houston, with what he described as extensive experience in missing persons cases connected to natural disaster displacement. He had filed monthly reports ever since. 20 years of summaries. I had read every one. None of them had ever mentioned Crescent Ventures. None of them had ever mentioned Nadine Olivier. None of them had ever pointed toward New York, or investment firms, or a 27-year-old woman running a company that had been my business partner for 2 years. I reached for my phone to call him. Muscle memory. 20 years of reaching for the phone whenever something about Celine surfaced. A lead, a question, a sleepless night. I called Frank. He answered. He listened. He said he would look into it. He filed another report. But this time, my hand stopped before it reached the screen. I do not know exactly what made me hesitate. Instinct, maybe. The kind of instinct you develop after 20 years in the Navy, where you learn that the most dangerous moment is not the ambush itself, but the seconds before it. When something feels wrong and you cannot yet name why. Frank had been filing reports for 20 years. 20 years. And the woman wearing my daughter's bracelet had been working with my company for 2 of them. I had mentioned Crescent Ventures to Frank during a monthly call in 2023. I remember it clearly. I had been pleased about the partnership, described the investment terms, mentioned the CEO by name, Nadine Olivier. He had said, "I will make a note of that." His exact words, the same careful tone he always used. And in 24 months of reports since that conversation, he had never once mentioned her again. Never flagged the connection. Never noted that a 27-year-old woman running an investment firm in New York might be worth investigating in a missing child case. I set my phone down, stared at the contact list. Frank Hebert, private investigator. The number I had called more than any other number in my phone for 2 decades. My finger hovered over it for 30 seconds. Then I scrolled past it. Past Frank, past Darius, past every name that belonged to the life I had been living on autopilot. I stopped on a name I had not called in 7 years. Lucius Tran, Luke. 60 years old. Former FBI special agent, retired to a cabin on the coast outside Biloxi. We had served together in the Navy before he went federal, and I went private. Worked financial crimes and missing persons at the Bureau for 22 years before his wife passed, and he disappeared into the Gulf Coast silence. I had respected that distance. For 7 years I had not called. I typed carefully. Luke. Need to meet. Biloxi, this week if possible. Not over phone. I stared at the message for a long moment, then added one word. Warren. Sent it. Expected nothing. Luke had withdrawn from everything and everyone after his wife died. 7 years of deliberate isolation. He responded in 15 minutes. 2 words that told me he already understood. Is this about Celine? I typed 1 word back. Yes. Then added 5 more. And the person I hired to find her. Luke's reply came faster this time. Thursday, 3 in the afternoon. Do not call your PI. Do not change your routine with him. A second message followed with GPS coordinates for what I assumed was his cabin on the coast outside Biloxi. Then a third message. The one that told me Luke already understood more than I had said. If he has been lying for 20 years, he is either very good or very scared. Either way, he is watching for changes. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and looked at the clock. 1:14 in the morning. Thursday was 2 days away. 2 days to sit with what I knew and pretend I did not know it. 2 days to avoid calling Frank, avoid questioning Darius, avoid doing anything that would signal to anyone that the architecture of my life had just shifted on its foundation. I pulled the file boxes from the hallway closet. 4 cardboard banker's boxes, neatly labeled by year range. 2006 through 2010, 2011 through 2015, 2016 through 2020, 2021 through present. 20 years of monthly reports. From Frank Hebert, private investigator. 240 summaries, consistently formatted, professionally delivered. I had read every single one, or thought I had. I cleared the kitchen table and began laying them out chronologically. Started with year 5, 2011. Read each page the way I should have read them 2 decades ago. Not for content, for pattern. The pattern emerged within the first hour. Frank never reported a negative result. Not once in 20 years. He never wrote the words, "Check this lead," and found nothing. Never documented searched foster records in this state, with no match. Never reported interviewed this witness who had no relevant information. Every single report described leads that required more time, investigations that needed continuation, promising directions that somehow never produced results, but always justified another month of billing. 240 reports without a single closed door. I sat back in my chair and stared at the pages covering my kitchen table. In my years as a naval engineer, I had learned to read diagnostic reports the way a doctor reads blood work. You do not just look for what is there. You look for what is missing. A system that never shows a fault is not a perfect system. It is a system with a broken sensor. The sensor is telling you everything is fine because it has been designed to tell you everything is fine, not because everything is fine. Frank's reports were a broken sensor. 20 years of output showing continuous activity with zero negative results. No competent investigator produces that pattern. A real investigation generates dead ends. You check a lead and it goes nowhere, and you document that it went nowhere to prove you did the work. Negative results are evidence of thoroughness. Only someone who is not actually investigating omits them entirely. I turned to the margins. Started with year 8, 2014. Page 3 of the March report showed a small notation in the margin. A file reference number, crossed out with a single line, NV14-221-M. I did not remember seeing it before. Flipped forward. Page 7 of the same report had another. Page 12. Another. Small marks. Easy to overlook when you are reading for content, instead of examining the document itself. I checked year 13. Same pattern. Crossed out reference numbers in the margins of pages that listed external agency contacts. FBI field offices. State foster care databases. Missing persons registries. Each crossed out number followed the same format. Year, case sequence, letter suffix. As if Frank had originally included references to real case files, and then removed them before sending the final reports to me. Remove them. Or been told to remove them. I pulled the 2023 reports. The year I had told Frank about Crescent Ventures during our monthly call. I remembered the conversation with painful clarity. I had been at my workbench, phone on speaker, polishing a commission piece for a hotel in Charleston. I mentioned the new investment partnership, described the terms, said the CEO's name out loud, Nadine Olivier, bright young woman, strong vision for community rebuilding. Darius is excited about the partnership. Frank had paused for exactly the length of time a person pauses when they are deciding what to say next. Then his voice, steady and professional. I will make a note of that. I searched his reports from 2023 forward. 24 monthly summaries. Not one mention of Crescent Ventures. Not one reference to Nadine Olivier. Not one line suggesting he had investigated whether a 27-year-old female CEO running an investment firm that partnered with my company might have any connection to my missing daughter. I had told him her name. He had made a note. And then he had filed 2 years of reports without mentioning that the woman wearing my daughter's bracelet was sitting in quarterly meetings with my son. What kind of investigator runs a case for 20 years and never once reports a definitively closed lead? What kind of professional never says, I looked here and found nothing? Never rules out a single possibility. Never closes a single line of inquiry. Either the worst investigator I could have hired, or someone who was not investigating at all. I checked the payment records. 20 years of monthly retainers. $1,200 a month from 2006 through 2015. $1,800 a month from 2016 forward, when he claimed expanded search capabilities required additional resources. I had never questioned the increase, never audited his expenses, never asked for receipts or verification of investigative activity. I had trusted him the way you trust the person you are paying to find your missing child, completely and without reservation, because the alternative was too terrible to consider. $384,000. That was the total I had paid Frank Hebert over 20 years to search for my daughter. $384,000 for 240 reports that never once said the words I looked and she was not there. I stacked the reports back into their boxes, returned each page to its exact position, each folder aligned precisely. If Frank was thorough enough to maintain a deception for 20 years, he was thorough enough to notice if something looked disturbed. I wiped the kitchen table clean, washed the coffee mug, put everything back exactly as it had been before I started. Thursday was 2 days away. Luke's cabin in Biloxi. The first honest conversation I would have about my daughter's case in 20 years. Until then, I had to be the man I had been yesterday. The father who trusted his investigator. The business owner who let his son run the company. The widower who opened his third drawer every morning and held a bracelet and told himself that discipline was enough. 2 days of performing a life I no longer believed in. The monthly check-in call with Frank was scheduled for the following Friday. I would have to make that call, would have to ask the same routine questions I had asked for 240 consecutive months, would have to sound exactly like a man who had accepted that his daughter was gone and the search was a formality maintained out of habit rather than hope. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark, listening to the distant sound of a trumpet playing somewhere deep in the French Quarter. When the saints go marching in. The same melody I had carved into silver 25 years ago. The same 6 notes that were wrapped around the wrist of a woman I had never met, who was running a company that had been paying my son for 2 years. The trumpet faded. The house was quiet. And for the first time in 20 years, I did not reach for the phone to call Frank Hebert. The conference room on the 14th floor of the Crescent Ventures headquarters in Atlanta smelled like new carpet and filtered air. The kind of sterile corporate environment that runs on calendars and keycards and quarterly projections, everything measured, everything controlled. The opposite of my workshop on Royal Street, where the air carries 20 years of solder flux and the faint ghost of chicory from the cafe next door. I had scheduled the meeting through official channels. Routine investment review. As per our partnership agreement. Darius usually attended these quarterly sessions on my behalf. This time I had told him I wanted to see the operation personally. He had paused on the phone when I said it. Just a fraction of a second. The kind of pause most people would not notice unless they had spent 30 years in the Navy listening for the silences between words. "You never go to the quarterlies," he said. His voice was casual, but the question underneath was not. I told him I wanted to understand our largest investment partnership before signing the transition documents he had been pushing. Reasonable explanation. The kind of thing a cautious founder would say. He accepted it without further questions, but I heard something tighten in his voice before he hung up. Attention. The beginning of attention. A young assistant led me to the conference room where Nadine Olivier sat reviewing documents on a tablet. She was younger in person than on television. 27. I knew from the research I had done in silence over the past week. She stood when I entered, shook my hand with a firm, practiced grip. "Mr. Sable," she said. "Your team's projections last quarter showed strong growth in the hospitality sector. I wanted to discuss expanding into the museum partnership space. Have you considered institutional clients?" The bracelet was there. Left wrist. Same position. The lotus caught the fluorescent light, the same way it had caught the studio lights on PBS. I forced my eyes away from it and focused on her face. Sharp features. Dark eyes that moved quickly. Cataloging details the way an engineer catalogs system components. Assessing, measuring, filing. "I have," I said. "But I wanted to review your acquisition strategy personally. When investment firms expand into new sectors, the financial architecture changes. I like to understand the architecture before I commit resources." She nodded. Pulled up a presentation on the wall screen. "I appreciate thoroughness. Most partners send junior representatives and bill senior rates." She did not know she was talking to her father. To her, I was just another business partner conducting due diligence. I let her believe it. We talked for 90 minutes. She walked me through Crescent Ventures' expansion plans with the precision of someone who trusts data more than intuition. Revenue models, risk assessments, market positioning, community impact projections that showed she was not just building a portfolio, but building something she believed in. Infrastructure for neighborhoods that had been neglected. Investment in regions still recovering from disasters. Rebuilding. I watched her think through problems the way I had taught myself to think. Systematically, carefully, assuming nothing, until the evidence confirmed it. She moved through the presentation with practiced efficiency. Clicked to the next slide. Gestured toward data points with her left hand. Every gesture made the bracelet shift on her wrist. Every shift caught the light. Every flash of silver was a signal meant only for me in a room where no one else could read it. She paused on a slide about timeline projections. The Community Reinvestment Fund closes in 8 weeks, she said. We need the partnership commitment finalized before then to secure the matching grants. I can have preliminary analysis to you in 2 weeks, I replied. She made a note on her tablet. Professional. Focused. No indication that the bracelet on her wrist meant anything beyond decoration. No indication that the man sitting across from her had carved that bracelet in a workshop on Royal Street while she sat beside him eating a grape popsicle and humming a song she did not know the words to. We finished the meeting. She stood and reached across the conference table to hand me a folder of updated financial projections. Her sleeve pulled back. Inside left hand. The back of her hand between the knuckles and the wrist. A pale scar. Small. Shaped like a 5-pointed star. Faded to near invisibility by 22 years of skin growth, but unmistakable in its geometry. 25 years is 9,125 days of holding a bracelet in a drawer and believing you will never see its match again. It is 2 decades of reading missing persons reports and memorizing distinguishing features until they burn into your memory like photographs you cannot stop developing. The scar was documented in her medical file from 2003. Tulane University Medical Center, Pediatric Burns Unit. Dr. An Patel had noted it as a distinguishing feature during treatment. Stellate burn scar. Dorsal surface. Left hand. Approximately 1.5 centimeters. Resulted from contact with heated silver casting mold. Patient age 5. Father present at time of injury. I had been present. I had been the one holding the casting mold when Celine reached for it because she wanted to help. I had been the one who drove her to Tulane, with Delphine pressing a wet cloth against the burn, while Celine cried, not from pain, but from embarrassment, that she had knocked over Daddy's work. I had been the one who sat in the waiting room while Dr. Patel cleaned the wound and told us it would scar in the shape of the mold's edge. A star. A small, 5-pointed star that would fade, but never fully disappear. Same size. Same position. Same distinctive geometry. 22 years older. But the body remembers what the mind forgets. I took the folder from her hand without letting my expression change. 30 years of naval discipline and corporate consulting had given me a mask that could survive almost anything. This was the almost. Thank you for coming personally, Mr. Sable, she said. It is rare to meet the actual founder. I like to stay involved, I said. My voice sounded normal. I have no idea how. She walked me to the elevator. Pressed the button. We stood side by side waiting for the doors to open, and I looked straight ahead at the brushed steel surface and saw our reflections standing next to each other. Same height ratio as the photos of me holding Celine at age 3. Same slight forward lean of the shoulders. Same angle of the jawline that Delphine used to say was the one feature Celine got from me instead of from her. The elevator arrived. I stepped in. She gave a professional nod, and the doors closed between us. I rode 14 floors down while my pulse hammered against the mask I had worn for 90 minutes without cracking. In the parking garage, I sat in my rental car for 20 minutes. My hands shook too badly to turn the key. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and breathed the way the Navy taught me to breathe during crisis situations. 4 counts in. Hold 4. 4 counts out. Repeat until the shaking stops, or until you can function through it. The shaking did not stop, but I could function through it. I had been functioning through it for 25 years. I drove to the airport thinking about 2 things. The scar on her hand that matched a medical record from 2003, and the question I could not yet answer. Before I walked into any room with Nadine Olivier again, I needed to understand why Frank Hebert, the man I had paid $384,000 to find my daughter, had never mentioned the woman wearing her bracelet. And I needed to understand why Darius, my son, the man who had sat across from her in 6 quarterly meetings over 2 years, had never once said a word. The cabin sat 60 yards from the waterline on a strip of Biloxi sand that had never fully recovered from Katrina. Luke Tran had bought it in 2011 for $19,000, a price that reflected the missing back wall, the septic tank that groaned in winter, and the fact that no insurance company in Mississippi would write a policy within 400 feet of the Gulf. He had rebuilt the wall himself, replaced the septic line, and never bothered with insurance. "If another hurricane comes," he once told Warren, "I'll just move the filing cabinet to higher ground." The filing cabinet, a dented 4-drawer government surplus unit, contained more actionable intelligence than most field offices Luke had supervised during his 22 years with the FBI. Warren arrived Thursday at 11 in the morning. He had driven the 2 hours from New Orleans with the windows down, letting salt air press against his face the way it had when he ran patrol boats out of Pensacola in the Navy. The Gulf smelled the same. Everything else had changed. Luke was on the porch, barefoot, drinking chicory coffee from a mug that read, "World's Okayest Retired Agent." He did not stand. He watched Warren climb the 3 wooden steps, set a canvas duffel on the rail, and sit in the opposite chair without a word. They had known each other since 2007, when Luke, then a senior special agent in the New Orleans field office, had reopened an inquiry into post-Katrina child displacement cases. Warren's file had crossed his desk. They had spoken 41 times that year. Nothing came of it. But Luke never closed the file, and Warren never stopped calling. "You look like a man who found something he wasn't ready to find," Luke said. Warren unzipped the duffel. Inside were 3 items. A printed screenshot of the PBS broadcast showing Nadine Olivier's left wrist. A photocopy of Celine's 2003 Tulane medical record documenting the stellate burn scar, and a single sheet of yellow legal paper on which Warren had written a timeline in block letters. Luke studied the screenshot first. He held it at arm's length. His reading glasses were somewhere inside, and tilted it toward the light. "The lotus," he said quietly, "and the maker's mark. Bottom of the clasp. Anchor. Crossed with a burin." Luke set the photo down and picked up the medical record. He read it twice. "Stellate scar, dorsal surface, left hand, 1.5 centimeters. He looked at Warren. "You saw it?" "Tuesday. Crescent Ventures conference room, 14th floor." She reached for a water glass, and the sleeve pulled back. "I counted to 3 before I could breathe." Luke placed the medical record beside the photo and picked up the yellow sheet. Warren's timeline ran vertically down the page. 2000 bracelet engraved. 2 made. Lotus plus 6 notes, plus maker's mark. 2005, Aug Hurricane Katrina. Celine, age 5. Separated during evacuation. 2005 SEP FEMA shelter system. Baton Rouge. Last confirmed sighting. 2006, 2025, Frank Hebert retained. 240 monthly reports. 0 negative results. $384,000 paid. 2024 Mar Crescent Ventures becomes primary investor in Sable Heritage Crafts. Darius signs. 2025 Nov. PBS NewsHour. Nadine Olivier shakes hands with the president. Bracelet visible. 2025 Nov. 2. Warren meets Nadine. Confirms bracelet plus scar. Luke read the timeline 3 times. On the 3rd pass, he tapped the line about Frank Hebert. 240 reports, and not 1 dead end. Not 1. That's not an investigation. That's a subscription service designed to keep you paying and not looking. Warren nodded. He had reached the same conclusion at 2 in the morning over his kitchen table, but hearing Luke say it aloud gave the thought a weight it had not carried before. Conclusions arrived at alone can feel like paranoia. Conclusions confirmed by a man who once ran counterintelligence operations feel like evidence. Luke stood, walked inside, and returned with a laptop and a second mug of chicory coffee. He set the laptop on the rail, opened a browser, and typed a series of search strings that Warren did not fully follow. Within 40 minutes, Luke had pulled 3 sets of records from publicly accessible databases. The first was a FEMA disaster assistance registration list from September 2005 showing intake records at the Baton Rouge River Center shelter. Over 11,000 displaced persons had been processed through that facility in the first 3 weeks after Katrina. Children separated from guardians were logged under a supplemental form, DHS, Form 561S, that required a physical description, an approximate age, and the name of the intake officer. The second was a Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services archive of post-Katrina foster placements. Between September 2005 and March 2006, the state had processed over 5,000 emergency foster and kinship placements. The records were partially redacted but included case reference numbers. The third was a cross-reference search, matching FEMA intake officer IDs against DCFS case numbers. Luke ran the query, waited, and turned the screen toward Warren. Intake officer for 14 of the unaccompanied minors at Baton Rouge River Center, including one girl logged as Jane Doe, approximately age 5. Burn scar left hand was a FEMA field coordinator named Frank Hebert. Warren felt the porch tilt beneath him. The man he had paid $384,000 to find his daughter had been the man who processed her into the system from which she disappeared. Luke closed the laptop. From this point forward, you change nothing. You sign what Darius asks you to sign. You answer Frank's calls if he makes them. You do not contact Nadine Olivier. You do not alter your routine by a single degree. The moment any of them suspect you know, evidence starts moving. Warren stared at the Gulf. A shrimp boat was crossing the horizon line, dragging nets that caught the late morning sun and turned them into brief, white wings. How long? Warren asked. Give me 2 weeks. I need the original DHS 561S intake form, the DCFS placement file, and the foster to adoption chain. If Frank's name appears at more than one link in that chain, we have a federal case, not just fraud, but conspiracy to conceal the identity of a displaced minor. Warren picked up his mug. The chicory had gone cold. He drank it anyway. Cold coffee was a minor inconvenience compared to the geography of betrayal that had just opened beneath his feet. Frank Hebert had not failed to find Celine. Frank Hebert had known exactly where she was from the very first day. The shrimp boat disappeared past the point. Luke refilled both mugs. Neither man spoke for a long time. The Gulf pushed small waves against the sand, patient and indifferent, the way it had pushed them for 1,000 years before Katrina and would push them for 1,000 years after. Warren finally broke the silence. Darius has a board meeting scheduled for mid-January. He wants me to transfer voting authority on the Heritage Crafts shares. Luke looked at him. Then mid-January is our deadline. The call came on a Sunday. Warren was soldering a hinge on a cigar box commissioned by a collector in Baton Rouge, a man who wanted the lid engraved with a pelican in flight, wings spread exactly 7 inches tip to tip. The work required a steady hand. Warren's hand had not been steady since Biloxi, but he had learned decades ago in the Navy that discipline could substitute for calm. He held the iron at the correct angle, applied the solder in a clean line, and let the phone ring 4 times before answering. Mr. Sable, it's Frank Hebert. Warren set the iron in its cradle. He looked at the pelican, half-finished, frozen mid-flight on the copper lid. Frank, it's been a while. 6 weeks, yes, sir. I wanted to give you an update on the quarterly review. I've been running some new database cross-references. NCIC, NAMUS. A couple of state-level registries I hadn't accessed before. Nothing concrete yet, but there are 2 leads I'm developing. One in Shreveport, one up near Memphis. Warren listened. He heard the familiar cadence, the careful optimism, the geographic specificity designed to suggest progress without delivering results. The implicit promise that next month might be different. He had listened to this cadence 240 times. It sounded different now. It sounded like a man reading stage directions. That sounds promising, Frank. Keep at it. Will do. I'll have the full write-up in your mailbox by the 15th. Warren hung up. He sat motionless for 3 minutes, timing himself by the brass ship's clock above his bench. 3 minutes of silence to ensure that nothing in his voice, his breathing, or his rhythm had betrayed what he knew. Luke's instruction echoed. You do not alter your routine by a single degree. He picked up the soldering iron and finished the pelican. Monday morning brought Darius. He arrived at the workshop at 9:15, which was early for him. Darius typically handled business from the Sable Heritage Crafts office on Magazine Street and visited the workshop only when documents required Warren's physical signature. He carried a leather portfolio and a to-go cup from the cafe on Royal Street, and he wore the expression he always wore when he wanted something approved quickly. Pleasant, efficient, slightly impatient. Morning, Dad. 2 things. Darius set the portfolio on the workbench, careful to avoid the flux tins and the tray of unfinished clasps. First, the quarterly distribution from the trust. Standard paperwork, same as last year. Second, he opened the portfolio and slid a document forward: the Geneva Partnership. Brunner Atelier wants to formalize exclusive distribution of our legacy collection across their European retail network. 14 stores. 5 countries. It's a significant deal. Warren picked up the Geneva document. It was 19 pages, dense with legal language, and bore the letterhead of Krauss, Lehmann, and Voss, a Zurich-based law firm. He turned to the signature page. His name was pre-typed above the line. Below it, a second signature line read, Darius Sable, Chief Operating Officer, Sable Heritage Crafts, LLC. When do they need it? End of the month, ideally. But I told them mid-January to give us room. Mid-January. The same window Luke had identified as the deadline. Warren felt the 2 timelines, Darius's corporate calendar and Luke's investigative calendar, pressing against each other like tectonic plates. One was moving toward a partnership that would bind Sable Heritage Crafts to a European distribution network. The other was moving toward a federal case file that could dismantle everything Darius had built. Warren set the document down. I'll read it this week. Have Raymond look at the liability clauses. Already done. Raymond flagged 2 items, force majeure language and an exclusivity window. I've got his notes in here. Darius tapped the portfolio. Good. Leave it with me. Darius lingered. He picked up one of the unfinished clasps from the tray, turned it in his fingers, and set it back. You seem quiet. I'm always quiet. Quieter than usual. Warren met his son's eyes. Darius was 33. Lean, sharp-jawed, with Delphine's cheekbones and a gaze that calculated distances the way a surveyor's instrument measures elevation, precise, dispassionate, always triangulating. Warren had adopted him in 2009, 4 years after Katrina, from a displaced children program run through the Archdiocese of New Orleans. Darius had been 8, wary, and already fluent in the arithmetic of survival. Who had resources, who could be trusted, who should be managed. Warren had loved him immediately and completely, the way a man who has lost a daughter loves a son who has lost everything. Now Warren looked at that face and asked himself a question he had been avoiding since Biloxi. Did Darius know? The Crescent Ventures partnership had been Darius's project from the beginning. He had identified the firm, pitched the investment structure, attended the quarterly meetings, and signed the contracts. Contracts that listed Nadine Olivier as CEO. Darius had met Nadine. Darius had sat across a table from a woman wearing a bracelet that Warren had engraved in this very workshop. Either Darius had never looked at her wrist, or he had looked and recognized exactly what he saw. Warren could not determine which possibility was worse. I'm fine, Warren said. Just focused on the Baton Rouge Commission. Darius nodded, picked up his coffee, and left. The bell above the door rang once as it closed. Warren waited until the sound of Darius's car faded down Chartres Street. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his workbench, the drawer that held supply receipts, vendor invoices, and 20 years of financial records bundled in rubber bands. He pulled out the stack from 2024 and spread the invoices across the bench. He was looking for a specific receipt. Luke had asked him to verify a single detail, whether any payment from Sable Heritage Crafts had ever been routed to Frank Hebert outside the standard monthly investigation fee. Warren worked through the stack methodically January, February, March. In April he stopped. A wire transfer dated the 14th of April 2024 in the amount of $4,200, payable to F. Hebert Consulting LLC, noted as Supplemental Research Archival Retrieval. The transfer had been initiated by Darius. Warren had never seen it. It did not appear in any of the monthly reports Frank had filed. Warren photographed the receipt with his phone. He sent the image to Luke with no text. Luke replied in 11 seconds. "Don't touch anything else." Thursday. Warren returned the invoices to the drawer, closed it, and picked up the soldering iron. The Pelican still needed its second wing. He worked on it until midnight, and when he finally turned off the bench lamp, the bird looked almost ready to fly. Outside, a trumpet played somewhere deep in the quarter. A slow, mournful phrase that climbed and fell and climbed again. The way grief does when it has lived long enough to learn its own melody. Luke Tran did not waste time on hospitality. When Warren climbed the porch steps Thursday morning, there was no chicory coffee waiting. No small talk about the Gulf. Luke was inside, standing over the kitchen table, which had been cleared of everything except a laptop, a legal pad covered in blue ink, and a single manila folder with a red tab. "Close the door," Luke said. "Sit down." Warren sat. The cabin smelled of printer ink and reheated gumbo. A portable printer, the kind Luke called his field unit, sat on the counter next to the stove, its power light blinking green. Luke opened the manila folder. Inside were 6 pages, each one a photocopy of a government form printed on paper that had yellowed at the edges. The header on each page read, "Department of Homeland Security, Federal Emergency Management, Agency Form 560, 1, S, Unaccompanied Minor, Intake Record, Baton Rouge River Center," Luke said. "September 4 through the 29th of September, 2005. 11,312 displaced persons processed through that facility. Of those, 841 were minors. Of the 841, 109 were classified as unaccompanied, meaning no parent, legal guardian, or identified family member was present at the time of intake." He placed the first page in front of Warren. "This is intake record number 061. Jane Doe. Approximate age, 5. Physical description: female, light brown skin, dark curly hair, brown eyes, approximately 38 inches tall, 29 pounds. Distinguishing marks: stellate scar, dorsal surface, left hand, approximately 1.5 centimeters. Warren read the form. The handwriting was small, angular, and consistent. A hand accustomed to filling out government paperwork under pressure. At the bottom of the form, in a box labeled Intake Officer, the signature read, F.J. Hebert, FEMA FC 09, Badge 4,471. "Frank processed her," Warren said. His voice was level. He had known this since Biloxi, but seeing the signature, the actual ink, the actual letters shaped by the actual hand of the man he had trusted for 20 years converted knowledge into something heavier. Knowledge is abstract. A signature is physical. It occupies space. It has weight. Luke placed the second page beside the first. "This is the DCFS referral form, generated from that intake record. Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services. Case reference 05BR00961. Filed the 9th of September 2005, 5 days after intake. The referral requests emergency foster placement for the minor, described in 561S number 061. Warren scanned the form. The referring officer's name was listed as Marguerite Declos, a DCFS caseworker assigned to the River Center shelter. But in the margin, handwritten in the same angular script as the intake form, was a note. Per FC. Hebert priority placement recommended. No. Next. Of kin. Identified after 72. HR hold. 72 hours, Warren said. I filed a missing persons report with NOPD on September 2. 2 days before this intake. My name, my address, my phone number, Celine's full description, including the scar, all of it was in the NOPD system. Yes. And FEMA intake officers were required to cross-reference unaccompanied minors against active missing persons reports. Required by protocol, yes. DHS Directive 2005-47, issued the 31st of August 2005, 3 days before this intake was processed. Every field coordinator received the directive. I verified that through the archive distribution log, Frank Hebert's badge number appears on the receipt confirmation. Warren stared at the form. The 72-hour hold was a standard waiting period during which FEMA and DCFS were supposed to exhaust all efforts to locate a minor's family before initiating foster placement. 72 hours. 3 days. Warren had been 17 miles away, in a Red Cross staging area on Airline Highway, filling out every form available to any human being, providing dental records, blood type, photographs. He had called FEMA's missing persons hotline 9 times in those 3 days. Each time he was told the system was overwhelmed and to call back. Meanwhile, 17 miles to the east, Frank Hebert had signed a form that said, no next of kin had been identified. Luke placed the 3rd page on the table. DCFS, placement record. Case 05. BR 00961. Emergency foster home, assigned. Thibodeau family, Gonzales, Louisiana. Placement date. The 12th of September 2005. Duration. Listed as temporary, pending family reunification efforts. How long did she stay? That's where it gets complicated. Luke pulled the 4th page forward. The Thibodeau placement lasted 11 months. In August 2006, the case was transferred from DCFS Baton Rouge to DCFS New Orleans, which by then was operating out of a temporary office in Metairie. The transfer paperwork lists a new caseworker, Renee Villiers, and a new foster family, the Pichon household in Kenner. 2 placements in the first year. 3, actually. Luke placed the 5th page. January 2007, the Pichon family requested removal. Reason cited: behavioral issues. The child was moved to a group facility in Terrebonne Parish. She stayed there until April 2008. Warren counted. His daughter had been 5 years old when the storm hit. By the time she left the group facility, she was 8. 3 foster placements, 2 parish transfers, 1 group home, and in all that time, Frank Hebert had been cashing Warren's checks and filing reports about leads in Shreveport and Memphis. Luke placed the 6th and final page in front of Warren. April 2008. Adoption petition filed in Orleans Parish Civil District Court. Petitioners. Confidential. Per sealed adoption record, but the case reference number on the petition 080RL04419 links back to the original DCFS case. 05BR00961. The adoption was finalized the 14th of June 2008. Who adopted her? The record is sealed. But I have the judge's name, the docket number, and the DCFS caseworker who signed the release. The caseworker was Renee Villiers, same woman who handled the Pichon transfer. And in the court filing, there's a supporting affidavit from a community reference. Luke paused. He turned the page so Warren could read the affidavit's signature line. The community reference who had vouched for the adoptive family's fitness was Frank J. Hebert. Warren did not move. He sat in the metal folding chair in Luke Tran's kitchen and felt the architecture of the last 20 years rearrange itself into a structure he did not recognize. Frank had not merely failed to find Celine. Frank had processed her intake, bypassed the missing persons cross-reference, recommended priority foster placement, and then 3 years later signed an affidavit supporting her adoption by a family whose identity remained sealed behind a court order. Frank had built the cage. And then he had sold Warren a pair of binoculars and told him to keep looking for birds. "The affidavit," Warren said. "Can you get the sealed adoption file?" Luke closed the folder. "Not without a court order or a federal subpoena. But there's another way. The adoptive parents' names may appear in a separate record, one that isn't sealed." "Which record?" "School enrollment. Louisiana requires a certified copy of the adoption decree for public school registration. Those records are maintained by the school district, not the court. And school districts have different retention and access rules." Warren looked out the window. The Gulf was gray today, flat and featureless, as if it too were withholding information. "I need a name, Luke. You'll have one by Monday." Warren returned from Biloxi at 9:30 on Thursday night. The French Quarter was loud with weekend tourists arriving, early laughter spilling from Bourbon Street. A brass band warming up outside Preservation Hall. The clatter of horse carriages on cobblestone. He parked in the alley behind the workshop, unlocked the side door, and stepped into the silence of his own life. The workshop smelled of flux and linseed oil, the same way it had smelled for 31 years. Warren had leased the building in 1994, when he left the Navy and decided that the steadiness required to engrave silver was the closest civilian equivalent to the steadiness required to defuse ordnance. Both demanded a quiet hand and an absolute refusal to rush. He had built the workbenches himself, installed the ventilation hood, mounted the brass ship's clock that still kept perfect time. Delphine had chosen the color of the walls, a pale sage green that she said made the silver look warmer. Delphine. His wife had died in 2013, 8 years after Katrina, from complications related to injuries sustained during the evacuation. She had never stopped searching for Celine. In her final year, when her body was failing but her mind remained sharp, she had spent hours at the small desk in the back room of the workshop, a room Warren had given her as an office, a space where she organized correspondence, tracked leads, and wrote letters that she mailed to every agency, shelter, and church group that had been involved in post-Katrina child relocation. Warren had not entered the back room in 12 years. After Delphine's death, he had closed the door and left everything as it was: her desk, her files, her reading lamp with the green glass shade. He told himself he was preserving her space. The truth, which he recognized now with the clarity that only crisis provides, was that he had been afraid. Afraid that entering the room would confirm that Delphine's search had been as futile as his own. Afraid that her files would contain the same emptiness that Frank's 240 reports contained. But Luke's discoveries had changed the equation. Delphine had been meticulous, more organized than Warren, more suspicious by nature. If Frank's deception had left any trace visible to a determined civilian, Delphine might have found it. Warren stood in front of the backroom door for a full minute. Then he turned the knob. The room was smaller than he remembered. Dust lay on every surface like a gray fabric, softening the edges of the desk, the filing cabinet, the stack of manila envelopes on the shelf. The green lamp still sat on the desk's left corner, its cord coiled neatly, the way Delphine always coiled cords, 3 loops, tucked under. A framed photograph of Celine at age 4 stood beside the lamp, the glass so dusty that the child's face was barely visible. Warren wiped the photograph with his sleeve. Celine looked back at him, dark, curly hair, brown eyes, a gap-toothed smile, the tiny silver bracelet glinting on her wrist. He set the photograph down and opened the desk's center drawer. Inside were 47 letters, bundled with a rubber band. Each was written in Delphine's careful cursive on cream-colored stationery she had ordered from a paper mill in Covington. The letters were addressed to Warren, but had never been mailed. They were dated monthly, beginning January 2012 and ending November 2012, the month before Delphine entered the hospital for the last time. Warren removed the rubber band. His hands trembled. He read the first letter standing up, then sat in Delphine's chair, the wooden swivel chair with the cracked leather seat, and read the rest. The letters were not love letters, though love was present in every line. They were investigative reports. Delphine had been conducting her own parallel inquiry, separate from Frank's, without telling Warren. She had written to FEMA regional offices, DCFS district supervisors, and 3 separate nonprofit organizations that tracked displaced Katrina children. She had received responses, some of which were stapled to the backs of her letters that included partial case numbers, referral dates, and the names of intake personnel. In her letter dated June 2012, Delphine wrote, "Warren, I have found something that frightens me. I requested the intake log for Baton Rouge River Center, September 2005, through a Freedom of Information request filed with DHS. The response was partially redacted, but the log includes a column for intake officer badge numbers. I cross-referenced the badge numbers against the FEMA personnel directory, which I obtained from a retired coordinator named Mabel Torres, who worked the River Center shelter. Badge 4,471 appears 14 times on the intake log. Badge 4,471 belongs to Frank Hebert." Warren stopped reading. He set the letter on the desk and pressed both palms flat against the wood. Badge 4,471. The same number on the 561S form Luke had shown him in Biloxi. Delphine had found it independently, 13 years ago, sitting in this room with a green lamp and a stack of government correspondence. He picked up the next letter, July 2012. Delphine continued, "I have not told you because I do not yet know what it means. Frank processes many displaced persons. His badge appearing on intake forms is not by itself evidence of wrongdoing. But I have requested the specific 561S forms associated with badge 4,471, and I am waiting for the response. I have also placed copies of everything in the flux tin on your workbench, the large one, the one you never open because you switched to paste flux in 2009. If anything happens to me before I can explain this to you, look in the tin, the flux tin." Warren stood so quickly that the swivel chair rolled backward and struck the filing cabinet. He walked out of the back room and crossed the workshop to his primary bench. The large tin, a rectangular container, originally designed for block soldering flux, olive green with a faded label, sat on the second shelf, behind a row of acid bottles. He had not opened it in over a decade. He had switched to paste flux in 2009, just as Delphine had noted, and the tin had become furniture, an object so familiar it had turned invisible. Warren lifted the tin. It was heavier than an empty container should have been. He pried the lid open with a bench knife. Inside, wrapped in a linen cloth that smelled faintly of Delphine's hand lotion, were 3 items. The first was a photocopy of the FEMA intake log for Baton Rouge River Center, with 14 entries highlighted in yellow, each bearing badge 4,471. The second was a receipt from a Western Union wire transfer dated the 3rd of March 2007 in the amount of $2,000 sent from D. Sable to F.J. Hebert. The memo line read, "Consultation fee placement coordination." Warren read the memo line twice. Placement coordination. Darius had been 11 years old in March 2007. He had been living in Warren's home for less than 2 years. An 11-year-old does not send wire transfers, which meant someone had used Darius's name. Or Darius had not been 11 in the way Warren understood 11-year-olds. The third item was a sealed envelope addressed to Warren in Delphine's handwriting. On the front, she had written, "Open only if I cannot tell you myself." Warren held the envelope. It was light, a single sheet inside, perhaps 2. He turned it over. The seal was intact, the glue still firm after 12 years in an airtight tin. He slid his bench knife under the flap and opened it. The letter was written on the same cream-colored stationery as the others, but the handwriting was different, smaller, tighter, as if Delphine had been pressing the pen harder against the paper, compressing her thoughts into the narrowest possible space. My dearest Warren, if you are reading this, I was not able to tell you in person, and I am sorry for that. I am sorry for many things, but mostly, I am sorry that I did not act sooner. I was afraid of being wrong. I am no longer afraid of that. I am now afraid of being right. Frank Hebert took Celine. I do not mean he took her with his hands. I mean he took her with his paperwork. He processed her intake at the Baton Rouge shelter and classified her as an unaccompanied minor with no identified next of kin, despite the fact that your missing persons report was active in the NOPD system. He recommended priority foster placement. He bypassed the 72-hour family reunification protocol. And in 2008, he signed a community reference affidavit supporting her adoption. I know this because I obtained the intake log through a FOIA request. Cross-referenced his badge number with the help of a retired FEMA coordinator named Mabel Torres, and requested, but never received the sealed adoption file. The court denied my petition on procedural grounds. I did not have standing, the judge said, because I could not prove the minor in question was Celine without a DNA comparison, and I could not obtain a DNA comparison without access to the minor, and I could not obtain access to the minor without proving she was Celine. The law is a circle sometimes, Warren. It protects the people inside it and keeps everyone else walking the perimeter. There is one more thing. The wire transfer receipt in this tin $2,000 from D. Sable to F. J. Hebert, March 2007, did not come from our bank account. I checked every statement from 2006 through 2008. The money was sent through a Western Union office in Kenner, using Darius's name and a Louisiana state ID. Darius was 11 years old. He did not have a state ID. Someone used his identity. I do not know who, and I do not know why, but the memo line says, placement coordination, and that phrase matches language used in DCFS internal communications regarding foster to adoption transitions. I have placed everything I found in the flux tin because it is the one container in your workshop that I know you will not open until you need to. I hope you never need to, but if you do, take everything to someone you trust. Not Frank, not the police, not anyone connected to the original case. Find someone outside the circle. I love you. I have always loved you. Find our girl, Delphine. Warren read the letter 3 times. On the third reading, he noticed that his vision was blurred not from tears, though tears were present, but from the involuntary tremor in his hands causing the paper to vibrate. He set the letter on the workbench and pressed it flat with both palms. The cream-colored stationery was smooth and cool. It smelled like the linen cloth, like hand lotion, like 12 years sealed in darkness. He picked up his phone and called Luke. It was past midnight. Luke answered on the second ring. I found Delphine's files. Tell me. Warren read the letter aloud, word by word, including the punctuation. When he finished, there was silence on the line for 8 seconds. Warren counted before Luke spoke. Your wife was a better investigator than half the agents I supervised. She identified the intake manipulation, the protocol bypass, and the adoption affidavit independently, using civilian channels, without subpoena power or database access. And she hit the same wall I would have hit the sealed adoption file. She mentioned a name. Mabel Torres. Retired FEMA coordinator. I know. I've been looking for her since Tuesday. Warren felt something shift inside his chest, a sensation not unlike the moment a soldering joint cools and sets when liquid becomes solid and the connection locks into place. Delphine had found Mabel Torres 13 years ago. Luke was looking for her now. The investigation that Delphine had begun alone in the back room was continuing. Carried forward by momentum she had stored in a flux tin, like a charge, waiting for a circuit to close. Did you find her? Warren asked. Mabel Torres, age 71, retired from FEMA in 2011. currently residing in Slidell, Louisiana, 40 minutes from where you're standing. She worked the Baton Rouge River Center shelter from September 3 through the 15th of October 2005 as a logistics coordinator responsible for supply distribution and personnel scheduling. She was not an intake officer, but she had access to the personnel directory and the shift rosters. Will she talk? I called her this morning. Told her I was a retired federal agent reviewing post-Katrina child displacement protocols for a private advocacy group. She talked for 47 minutes. What did she say? Luke paused. Warren heard the sound of paper being turned. Luke consulting his notes. She remembers Frank Hebert. She remembers him specifically because he volunteered for extra intake shifts during the second week of September 2005, when the shelter was at maximum capacity and most coordinators were requesting transfers to less overwhelmed sites. She said Frank processed more unaccompanied minors than any other intake officer at the facility, 14, by her count, which matches the intake log. She said she found it unusual, but attributed it to dedication. Did she mention anything about the cross-reference protocol? Yes. She said the directive requiring intake officers to check unaccompanied minors against active missing persons reports was issued on August 31, but was not consistently implemented until mid-September due to system overload. She said some officers checked manually using printed knopped bulletins posted in the coordination room. Others relied on a digital database that crashed repeatedly during the first 2 weeks. She could not confirm whether Frank checked the database or the printed bulletins for any specific intake, but she confirmed he had access to both. She confirmed he had access, he was trained on the protocol, and he signed the distribution receipt for the directive. What she could not confirm, and what she told me she has wondered about for 20 years, is why none of Frank's 14 unaccompanied minors were ever reunified with family. Every single one entered the foster system. Statistically, that is an anomaly. The facility-wide reunification rate for unaccompanied minors was 61% within the first 60 days. Frank's rate was 0. Warren sat down on the workshop stool. 0. 14 children processed by one intake officer, and not a single one returned to family. The number sat in his mind like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples outward toward implications he was not yet ready to follow. She'll testify? Warren asked. She said she's been waiting for someone to ask the right questions for 20 years. Her words, not mine. I'm driving to Slidell Monday to take a formal statement. Warren looked at the contents of the flux tin spread across his workbench. The intake log, the wire transfer receipt, Delphine's letter, 3 pieces of paper, 12 years in a sealed container, and behind them, the 47 letters in the back room. Each one a month of Delphine's private war against a system that had swallowed her daughter and refused to give her back. Luke. Yeah, Delphine said to find someone outside the circle. She was right. And that's what you did. Warren hung up. He gathered the 3 items from the flux tin, placed them back inside the linen cloth, and returned them to the container. Then he carried the tin to the back room and set it on Delphine's desk beside the photograph of Celine. The green lamp cast a small circle of light. Inside that circle were a dead woman's evidence, a missing daughter's face, and a tin that smelled of flux and linseed oil, and the particular grief of someone who had known the truth but could not make the world believe her. Warren turned off the lamp and closed the door. But this time, he did not lock it. Mabel Torres lived in a single-story brick house on a quiet street in Slidell, where every yard had a magnolia tree and every mailbox still bore the faded waterline mark from Hurricane Katrina. The mark on Mabel's mailbox was 4 feet. 7 inches. She knew the exact measurement, because she had painted a small white line over the stain in 2006 and written the number beside it in permanent marker. So I don't forget what the water took, she told Luke when he pulled into her driveway Monday morning. She was 71. Small, sharp-eyed, with silver hair pulled back in a bun, so tight it looked structural. She wore a housecoat with blue flowers and orthopedic shoes. And she moved through her kitchen with the efficient, angular precision of someone who had spent decades managing logistics under pressure. Before FEMA, She had been an Army supply sergeant. Before the Army, she had been the oldest of 9 children in a shotgun house in Gentilly. She had learned to organize scarcity before she learned to drive. Luke sat at her kitchen table. She poured him coffee without asking if he wanted any and set a plate of pecan shortbread between them. On the table, beside the plate, she had already placed a cardboard banker's box. "I kept everything," she said. "Personnel rosters, shift schedules, supply logs, my personal notes. FEMA never asked for them back. I don't think FEMA knew I had them." Luke opened the box. Inside were file folders, each labeled in Mabel's handwriting with dates and categories. She had organized 20 years of memory into a system as clean as a field manual. "Tell me about Frank Hebert," Luke said. Mabel sat down across from him. She folded her hands on the table, a gesture that reminded Luke of witnesses who had rehearsed their testimony, not out of deception, but out of respect for the gravity of what they were about to say. Frank arrived at Baton Rouge River Center on the 3rd of September, 2005. He was assigned as a field coordinator FC09, badge 4471. His primary duties were logistics, cot allocation, meal distribution, transport scheduling, standard FC work. But on September 5, he requested reassignment to the intake desk. Specifically, he requested the unaccompanied minor processing station. Was that unusual? Very. The UAM station was the hardest post in the shelter. You're processing children who are scared, injured, dehydrated, separated from everyone they know. Most coordinators avoided it. The ones who worked it burned out within a week. Frank volunteered and stayed for 3 weeks. Did he give a reason? He told the shift supervisor, a woman named Carolyn Bro, that he had experience with child welfare from a previous FEMA deployment in Florida after Hurricane Ivan. Carolyn checked his file, confirmed the Ivan deployment, and approved the transfer. "I remember because I had to adjust the shift roster to backfill his logistics slot." Luke took notes in his blue ink, each line precise. During his time at the UAM station, how many unaccompanied minors did he process? 14. "I know, because I maintained a parallel count for supply purposes. Each UAM required a separate hygiene kit, a clothing bundle, and a designated cot in the family reunification zone. I requisitioned 14 kits for Frank's intakes between September 5 and September 22. The facility-wide reunification rate for unaccompanied minors was 61%. Frank's was 0. Were you aware of that at the time?" Mabel was quiet for a moment. She picked up a piece of shortbread, looked at it, and set it down without eating. "Not at the time, no. The shelter was processing hundreds of people a day. I was managing supplies for 11,000 displaced persons with a team of 6. I didn't track outcomes. That was DCFS's responsibility once the referrals were filed. But afterward, in 2007, when the Congressional Review Committee published its report on Katrina child displacement, I read the statistics, and I went back to my records." She reached into the banker's box and pulled out a folder labeled Hebert. F notes. "I compared my supply requisitions against the DCFS outcome reports that were included in the congressional appendix. I found that all 14 of Frank's UAM intakes entered the foster system. None were reunified. I wrote a letter to the FEMA Inspector General's office in January 2008. Luke looked up from his notes. "What happened?" "Nothing. I received a form letter thanking me for my concern and stating that the matter had been referred to the appropriate office for review. I never heard anything again. I wrote a second letter in March 2008. Same response. I wrote a third in June. No response at all." She pulled a second folder from the box, Correspondence. IG. Inside were copies of her 3 letters and the 2 form responses, each meticulously dated and annotated. "Mrs. Torres, I'd like to ask about a specific intake. The 4th of September 2005. Form 561S, number 061. Female child. Approximately age 5. Distinguishing mark. Stellate. Scar. On the dorsal surface of the left hand. Mabel's expression changed. The careful composure did not break, but something behind her eyes shifted a recognition. A weight settling into place. The little girl with the star scar. She said. Yes. I remember her. Tell me. She came in on the evening of September 4. A National Guard transport dropped off a group of 37 evacuees from the 9th Ward. Most were adults. There were 6 children, 3 of them unaccompanied. She was one of the 3. She was wearing a yellow dress that was too big for her. Someone on the transport had given it to her. And she had a silver bracelet on her left wrist. Luke set his pen down. You remember the bracelet? I remember it because it was beautiful. It was too beautiful for a shelter. Most of the children came in with nothing. No shoes, no belongings, nothing. This child had a bracelet that looked like it had been made by a jeweler. It had a flower on it, a lotus, I think. And when I was putting together her hygiene kit, she held up her wrist and said, "My daddy made this." Those were the only words she spoke the entire time I saw her. Luke wrote the sentence in his notebook and underlined it twice. What happened after intake? Frank processed her. I provided the kit. She was assigned a cot in the reunification zone, Section C, Row 14. I have the cot assignment log. She pulled another sheet from the box. The next time I checked Section C 2 days later, her cot was empty. The kit was still there, unopened. But the child was gone. Frank told me she had been transferred to a DCFS emergency foster placement. I asked if family had been contacted. He said the 72-hour hold had been completed, and no family was identified. The hold is 72 hours. She was moved in 48. I know. I noted the discrepancy in my personal log. She pulled out yet another sheet, a lined notebook page, with the entry circled in red ink. The 6th of September 2005. UAM 061 moved to DCFS placement. 48 hours post-intake. 72 HR hold not completed per protocol. Reported to Shift Supervisor Bro. And Bro's response? Carolyn said she would follow up with Frank. I don't know if she did. Carolyn transferred to the Houston Astrodome facility on September 8. After that, there was no one to follow up. Luke closed his notebook. He looked at the banker's box, the labeled folders, the 20 years of meticulous record-keeping maintained by a woman in a brick house in Slidell who had painted a waterline on her mailbox so she would not forget. Mrs. Torres, would you be willing to provide a sworn statement documenting everything you've told me today, including your records? Mabel Torres looked at him with the eyes of a woman who had written 3 letters to an inspector general and received 2 form replies and 1 silence. Mr. Tran, I have been waiting 20 years for someone to ask me that question. Where do I sign? 3 investigations were now running simultaneously, and Luke Tran managed them the way he had once managed counterintelligence operations in the Bureau on a whiteboard, with colored markers, each thread assigned its own column. The whiteboard hung on the wall of his Biloxi cabin, between a mounted redfish and a framed photograph of his daughter's college graduation. Red marker for Warren's thread, blue for Nadine, green for Darius. A horizontal black line across all 3 columns represented the convergence point. Mid-January. The board meeting at which Darius intended to secure Warren's voting authority over Sable Heritage Crafts. Warren drove to Biloxi on Wednesday, 6 days after Luke's meeting with Mabel Torres. The whiteboard was the first thing he saw when he walked through the door. Sit down, Luke said. We need to talk about DNA. Warren sat. Luke handed him a mug of chicory coffee and stood beside the whiteboard like a professor, beginning a lecture he had rehearsed, but hoped he would never have to deliver. Red column first. Your thread. We have Delphine's letters, the flux tin contents, the intake log with badge 4471, Mabel Torres's sworn statement, the 48-hour protocol violation, and the wire transfer receipt linking Darius's name to a payment to Frank Hebert in 2007. This is strong circumstantial evidence of intake fraud and conspiracy to conceal the identity of a displaced minor. But circumstantial evidence builds a theory. It doesn't close a case. What closes it? Biology. We need to prove that Nadine Olivier is Celine Sable. That requires a DNA comparison, your sample against hers, with a match probability high enough to satisfy a federal court. The threshold for parentage confirmation in Louisiana is 99.5% or higher. Anything below that, and a defense attorney turns it into reasonable doubt. Warren set his mug on the table. How do we get her sample without telling her who she is? Luke moved to the blue column. That's the second thread. Nadine Olivier, CEO of Crescent Ventures. Age, 27. Born according to her public records, Nadine Marie Olivier, the 12th of April 1998, in Lafayette, Louisiana. Adopted by Jean-Pierre and Claudette Olivier, owners of a small engineering consultancy in Lafayette. Both deceased Jean-Pierre in 2019, Claudette in 2021. Nadine inherited the consultancy, pivoted it into a venture capital firm focused on Gulf Coast reconstruction, and rebranded it as Crescent Ventures in 2022. Her birth date is wrong, Warren said. Celine was born the 8th of June 2000. If Nadine is Celine, she's 25, not 27. Correct. The age discrepancy is consistent with the falsified intake record. Frank listed UAM 061 as approximately age 5 in September 2005, which is accurate. Celine was 5. But the adoption decree, which we haven't seen, likely assigned a new birth date based on the intake estimate rather than verified records. A 2-year adjustment is within the range of error that post-Katrina adoption courts routinely accepted. Warren absorbed this. His daughter had not only lost her name, she had lost 2 years of her own life, reassigned by paperwork, into a timeline that was not hers. Luke continued, I cannot approach Nadine directly. If she learns she may be a kidnapping victim before we have the federal case assembled, she could panic, contact her attorneys, or inadvertently alert Darius and Frank. We need her DNA collected without her knowledge, which, in Louisiana, is legal for law enforcement purposes under a court order. But we don't have law enforcement status. So how? Voluntarily discarded material. Under Louisiana law, DNA collected from objects a person has voluntarily abandoned, a coffee cup, a napkin, a water bottle, is admissible without a warrant. I need you to meet with Nadine again. In a setting where she drinks from a container you can retain. Warren thought about this. The last time he had sat across from Nadine in the Crescent Ventures conference room, she had drunk from a glass of water, poured by an assistant. The glass had been cleared by the same assistant when the meeting ended. A controlled corporate environment offered no opportunity for collection. The Rosewood, Warren said. Luke raised an eyebrow. The Rosewood Cafe, on Magazine Street. Darius takes investors there for informal meetings. If I suggest a lunch meeting with Nadine off-site, casual, to discuss the Geneva partnership, Darius would arrange it. He'd see it as a good sign. His father finally engaging with the business. Luke considered this for 10 seconds. Can you sit across from your daughter for an hour and act like she's a business partner? I sat across from her for 90 minutes in Atlanta and didn't break. I can do it again. Then set the meeting. But do not collect the sample yourself. I'll have someone in the cafe, a colleague, retired forensics. Someone Nadine will never notice. She'll handle the collection after Nadine leaves. Luke moved to the green column. Third thread. Darius. This was the column Warren did not want to look at. The green marker lines contained a truth that was still forming, still assembling itself from fragments, and Warren was not certain he wanted to see the completed shape. The wire transfer in 2007 used Darius's name and a Louisiana state ID, Luke said. Darius was 11. He did not have a state ID. Someone obtained one using his identity, possibly Frank, possibly someone else. But the 2024 wire transfer is different. The $4,200. Yes. That transfer was initiated from the Sable Heritage Crafts business account by Darius personally. He was 32 years old, fully competent, and acting as COO. The memo reads, Supplemental Research Archival Retrieval. I believe that payment was made to Frank Hebert to retrieve or destroy records that could connect Nadine Olivier to Celine Sable. Why would Darius want those records destroyed? Luke set the marker down. He turned from the whiteboard and looked at Warren directly, because if Nadine is proven to be Celine, she is your biological daughter. Under Louisiana succession law, a biological child has inheritance rights that supersede those of an adopted child. Particularly, if the adoption was completed after the biological child's disappearance, and without the biological parent's knowledge that the child was alive. Darius's position as your heir, his control over Sable Heritage Crafts, and the Geneva Partnership all depend on Celine remaining missing. The cabin was quiet. Outside, the Gulf pushed its small, patient waves against the shore. The whiteboard's 3 columns red, blue, green, converged at the black horizontal line. Mid-January. You're telling me my son paid the man who stole my daughter to make sure she stayed stolen. Luke did not soften it. I'm telling you the evidence points in that direction. The 2007 transfer may have been identity fraud committed by Frank using Darius's name, but the 2024 transfer was Darius, and Darius has been attending quarterly meetings with Nadine Olivier for 2 years without ever mentioning to you that the CEO of your primary investor wears a bracelet engraved with a lotus and a maker's mark that matches yours. Warren stared at the green column. Darius's name was written at the top in Luke's careful handwriting. Below it, Coup, Sable Heritage Crafts. Adopted 2009. Age 33. Motive: inheritance. Corporate control. Connection to Frank: $2,000. 2007. Disputed. $4,200. 2024. Confirmed. Warren had adopted Darius out of love. He had given him a home, a name, a trade, a company. He had watched him grow from a wary 8-year-old into a sharp, ambitious man. And he had felt pride, the particular pride of a father who believes he has given a displaced child a second chance. Now he looked at the whiteboard and saw the possibility that Darius had taken his second chance and used it to bury Warren's first daughter. The Rosewood meeting, Warren said. I'll call Darius tonight and ask him to set it up. Luke nodded. He picked up the red marker and drew an arrow from Warren's column to the blue column, connecting them at a point labeled DNA Rosewood. 1 coffee cup, Luke said. That's all we need. Warren finished his chicory and set the mug on the table. He noticed that his hand was steady, not calm. Steadiness and calm are different things. Calm is the absence of turbulence. Steadiness is the decision to hold still while the turbulence continues. He had made silver for 31 years. He knew the difference. The Rosewood Cafe occupied the ground floor of a renovated cotton warehouse on Magazine Street. Its exposed brick walls softened by hanging ferns and brass fixtures reclaimed from a decommissioned steamboat. Warren arrived 20 minutes early and chose the corner table for its sightline to the entrance, a habit from 22 years in the Navy. A man who controls his angles, controls his options. Luke's colleague was already seated 3 tables away. Renata Voss, 64. Retired forensic evidence technician from the Jefferson Parish Crime Lab, sat reading a paperback and drinking iced tea. In her handbag were nitrile gloves and 2 sterile evidence bags. She had agreed to participate without fee. 20 years of Katrina cases that never closed, she told Luke. I'll do it for the girl in the yellow dress. Nadine arrived at noon with Darius beside her. They crossed the room together, Darius in a charcoal blazer, Nadine in a navy dress, the silver bracelet catching window light as she extended her hand. Mr. Sable, it's good to see you again. Warren shook her hand. The bracelet was 6 inches from his face. The lotus, the fine engraving lines, the maker's mark on the clasp. He held her hand for exactly the duration courtesy required. "Call me Warren." They discussed the Geneva partnership for 73 minutes, Brunner Atelier's retail footprint, the exclusivity window, the force majeure clause. Nadine was precise, knowledgeable, and occasionally funny. She made a joke about Swiss punctuality that drew a genuine laugh from Warren, a laugh that surprised him because it came from a place deeper than performance. He was laughing at his daughter's joke. Nadine drank her cappuccino with her left hand, the hand with the stellate scar, setting the cup down between thoughts. When the meeting ended, she pushed the cup to the edge of the table and stood. This was productive. "I think Geneva is the right move for both firms." Nadine left. Darius lingered, confirmed next steps, then followed. Warren remained seated long enough for Renata Voss to close her paperback, walk toward the bar, and passing Nadine's vacated seat, lift the cappuccino cup with a napkin and slip it into the evidence bag inside her handbag. She was out the side door before the waiter came to clear. Warren paid the bill and walked to his truck. A text from Luke arrived as he started the engine. "Renata has the sample. Private lab in Houston. Results in 72 hours. 72 hours. The same duration as the family reunification hold Frank Hebert had cut short by 24 hours. In September 2005. That evening, Luke called with a development Warren had not anticipated. Crescent Ventures has been under an internal compliance review for 3 months. Standard procedure before a major partnership like Geneva. The audit is being conducted by Kessler & Rhodes, an outside firm based in Atlanta. I have a contact there from a 2014 financial crimes case. She called me yesterday not about our investigation, but about something she found during the audit." Warren turned off the engine and listened. Kessler & Rhodes identified 38 internal emails between Darius Sable and Frank Hebert, sent over 14 months from January 2024 through February 2025. The emails were routed through a secondary server under a subsidiary account, Sable Heritage Digital, an LLC registered in Delaware that doesn't appear in the parent company's organizational chart. A shadow server. Effectively, yes. The auditing firm's forensic team decrypted them as part of the compliance scope. The content is significant. Luke paused. Warren heard paper rustling Luke, selecting his words with the care of a man who understood that each sentence was adding weight to a structure that could not be unbuilt. The emails document a coordinated effort between Darius and Frank to manage what they call the Olivier matter. In January 2024, Darius instructs Frank to locate and secure all DCFS records associated with case 05BR00961, Celine's case. Frank responds that the court file is sealed, but the DCFS district office in Metairie may retain duplicate intake forms. Darius authorizes $4,200 for Frank to travel to Metairie and retrieve them. The wire transfer. Supplemental research. Archival retrieval. Now Warren knew what had been retrieved. Subsequent emails discuss the Crescent Ventures partnership. Darius expresses concern that Warren's increasing involvement in the business could lead to a face-to-face encounter with Nadine. Frank advises keeping Warren focused on workshop commissions and away from investor relations. In one email dated the 14th of June 2024, Darius writes, I'm quoting directly, "He cannot meet her. If he sees the bracelet, everything falls apart." Warren closed his eyes. The truck cab was dark and silent. Through the windshield, the workshop stood in blue-gray street lamp light, its brick facade unchanged, its windows dark, its interior holding every tool, every memory of 31 years. Somewhere inside, in a flux tin on a dead woman's desk, lay the evidence Delphine had found first and Darius had spent 14 months trying to bury. He cannot meet her. If he sees the bracelet, everything falls apart. The emails are now under legal hold, Luke continued. Kessler and Rhodes flagged them as potentially relevant to criminal conduct, specifically violation of Section 12.7 of the Louisiana Business Corporations Act, which prohibits officers from using corporate resources to conceal material information from shareholders. I'm the majority shareholder. Yes. And Darius used a corporate subsidiary server, funded by corporate accounts, to conceal information directly relevant to your personal and legal interests. Combined with the FEMA evidence, the DCFS records, and Mabel's statement, this is part of a federal conspiracy case. When do we go to the FBI? After the DNA. Without biological confirmation that Nadine is Celine, the emails are evidence of suspicious behavior, not a crime against a specific victim. The DNA closes the circle. 72 hours. 72 hours. Then we call Special Agent Diana Geneva, FBI New Orleans Field Office, Civil Rights Division. She handles post-Katrina child displacement cases. She's been waiting for one with teeth. Warren sat in the dark truck after Luke hung up. The street was quiet. The magnolia tree beside the workshop was blooming white flowers the size of dinner plates, their scent heavy in the December air. He thought about Darius typing that email in June, sitting in the Magazine Street office, writing, he cannot meet her about a man who had given him a home when he had none. He thought about Delphine writing her letters in the back room to no one. He thought about a 5-year-old in a yellow dress holding up a silver bracelet and saying, my daddy made this. Then he went inside and waited. The DNA results arrived on a Monday in a sealed envelope delivered by courier to Luke Tran's cabin. Luke opened it, read it twice, and called Warren. 99.7%. Warren was holding a graver over an unfinished monogram plate. He set the tool down. Say it again. Parentage probability. 99.7%. 16 STR, loci. Consistent allele sharing across all markers. 12-page report. I've already sent a copy to Diana Geneva. The workshop was silent, except for the brass ship's clock. 99.7. The number that converted 25 years of searching into a biological fact. Celine was alive. Celine was Nadine. Nadine was his daughter. Geneva wants to move fast, Luke said. The board meeting is January 15, 9 days out. If Darius secures your voting authority before the arrest, he could transfer assets through the Delaware subsidiary and create a jurisdictional tangle that would take months to unwind. Diana wants to execute the arrest at the board meeting, maximum containment, minimum flight risk. Frank too? Simultaneous pickup at his residence in Metairie. Coordinated. Same minute. Does Nadine know? Not yet. Diana will inform her after the arrests with a victim advocate present. Nadine is not a suspect, she's a displaced minor whose identity was concealed through federal document fraud. You can be in the building, but not in the room during disclosure. She needs to hear it from a federal agent first. Warren did not argue. A daughter who does not know she is a daughter cannot meet her father. In the same breath she learns, her life has been disassembled. The 9 days passed with the slowness of time observed under pressure. Warren maintained his routine. He completed the monogram plate, signed the quarterly trust distribution, and answered Frank's monthly call. The 241st listening to a fabricated lead in Tallahassee, with the patience of a man who understood that patience was not passive, but the decision to let the passive machinery complete its rotation. Darius called twice about the agenda. The meeting would be held in the Sable Heritage Crafts conference room on Magazine Street, mahogany table Warren had built in 2011. 8 green leather chairs. Attendees: Warren, Darius, Raymond, the attorney, Nadine for Crescent Ventures, and 3 independent board members Darius had appointed. Warren noted the arithmetic. 3 independents plus Darius equaled 4 votes. Warren held 2 his own, and the founders' weighted vote. Nadine held the 7th as investor representative. If Darius secured Warren's voting authority, he would control 6 of 7 seats. The Geneva partnership would proceed, and Celine Sable would remain Nadine Olivier forever. January 15 arrived, gray and cold. Warren, dressed in a dark suit, knotted his tie, and noticed his hands were steady. Not calm steady. He arrived at 8:30, 90 minutes early. The conference room was set. Water glasses, leather folders, a projection screen displaying the agenda. Item 1. Q. 4 Financials. Item 2. Geneva Partnership Ratification. Item 3. Transfer of Founders Voting Authority. Warren sat at the head of the table and placed his hands on the mahogany surface. The wood was warm with the memory of every meeting and signature it had held. Attendees arrived between 9:45 and 9:55, board members with laptops, Raymond with legal files, Nadine in a charcoal blazer and the bracelet. Darius entered last. At exactly 10, closed the door, and sat at the opposite end. Good morning, everyone. Let's begin. Item 1 passed in 12 minutes. Standard financials. Unanimous. Item 2 took longer. Raymond reviewed the Geneva terms, clause by clause. Nadine provided Crescent Ventures' position. Warren asked 2 questions about liability caps and watched the clock behind Darius's head. At 10:37, the conference room door opened. 3 people entered in dark suits with credentials on lanyards. The woman leading them was Diana Geneva, mid-40s, short brown hair, an expression that combined authority with controlled sorrow. Special Agent Diana Geneva, FBI New Orleans Field Office. She held her credentials toward the table. I have federal arrest warrants for Darius Sable on charges of conspiracy to conceal the identity of a displaced minor, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. The room went silent. Not quiet silent. Quiet is the absence of noise. Silence is the presence of shock, filling the space where noise used to be. Darius did not move. His hands stayed on the portfolio. His eyes went to Diana, then to Warren. In that glance, less than 2 seconds, Warren saw recognition, not surprise. The look of a man who had always known this day was possible, and who now watched the walls he had built come down with the calm of someone who had rehearsed the collapse. Stand up, please, Mr. Sable. Darius stood. An agent placed handcuffs on his wrists. He did not resist. He looked at Warren one more time. I did what I thought I had to do, he said. Warren did not respond. There was nothing to say to a sentence that contained no apology. Only the assertion of necessity, the coldest of all justifications. The one that permits everything and regrets nothing. They led Darius out. The door closed. The conference room remained. Frozen board members staring. Raymond gripping his pen. Nadine standing with one hand on her chair. Her face a mask of confusion and the beginning of fear. Diana Geneva turned to her. Miss Olivier, I need to speak with you privately. There is a victim advocate waiting downstairs. What I have to tell you is not about the company, it's about you. Nadine looked at Warren. It was an instinctive glance, the kind a person directs toward the most stable object in a room that has suddenly become unstable. Warren met her eyes and held them. He could not tell her. Not here. Not now. But he held her gaze, the way a lighthouse holds its beam, not moving, not reaching, simply present, casting light toward a shore that does not yet know it is being guided home. Nadine followed Diana out of the room. The door closed a second time. Warren remained at the table. The projection screen still displayed Item 3. Transfer of Founders Voting Authority. He reached for the remote and turned it off. Raymond set his pen down. Warren. What just happened? Warren looked at the mahogany table he had built with his own hands. At the empty chair where his adopted son had been sitting 30 seconds ago. At the door through which his biological daughter had just walked toward a truth she did not yet possess. Justice, he said. 25 years late. Nadine was in the downstairs office for 2 hours and 11 minutes. Warren knew the exact duration because he sat in the conference room and watched the brass clock on the wall. A clock he had installed himself. Synchronized to the ship's clock in his workshop, both of them keeping the same time the way 2 hearts in the same family keep the same rhythm, even when separated by 25 years and a hurricane. Diana Geneva had taken Nadine to the office. Warren used for client consultations a small room with a leather couch, a desk, and a window that looked out onto Magazine Street. The victim advocate was a woman named Teresa Kingsley, a licensed counselor who specialized in identity disruption cases. Warren had never heard the term before. Luke explained it. Identity disruption. The psychological condition that occurs when a person discovers that the foundational facts of their life, name, birth date, parentage, origin, are not what they believed. It is not the same as learning a secret. It is learning that you are the secret. Warren did not try to listen through the door. He did not pace. He sat at the mahogany table and placed his hands flat on the surface. The way he placed his hands on a silver plate before beginning an engraving, still, deliberate, waiting for the tremor to pass so the first cut would be clean. Raymond had left at 11:15. After Warren declined to explain further, the board members departed one by one, each casting a look toward Warren that combined confusion with the particular discomfort of people who have witnessed something they do not yet understand and are not certain they want to. By 11:30, Warren was alone in the conference room. At 12:48, Diana Geneva opened the door. "She wants to see you." Warren stood. His knees protested. He had been sitting for over 2 hours without moving, but his hands were steady. He followed Diana down the stairs, across the narrow hallway, and stopped at the office door. Diana placed her hand on the knob, but did not turn it. "She's been told everything. The intake fraud, the DCFS records, Frank's role, Darius's emails, the DNA match." She asked 3 questions. The first was whether her adoptive parents, Jean-Pierre and Claudette, knew. "We don't have evidence that they did." The second was whether Darius acted alone or with others. "I told her the investigation is ongoing." The third question was about you. What did she ask? She asked if you ever stopped looking. Warren felt something crack inside his chest, not break, crack. The way a seed cracks, when the pressure of its own growth finally exceeds the strength of its shell. He had been holding himself together with discipline and routine and the Navy breathing technique for 9 days. The crack was not collapse. It was the beginning of something emerging. "What did you tell her?" "I told her about the 241 monthly reports. I told her about Delphine's letters. I told her about the flux tin." Warren nodded. Diana turned the knob and opened the door. Nadine was sitting on the leather couch. Teresa Kingsley sat in the desk chair, slightly back, giving space. The room smelled of coffee and tissue paper. A box of tissues sat on the couch beside Nadine. 3 used tissues crumpled next to it, a small, precise number that suggested she had cried exactly enough to acknowledge the shock and then stopped, the way a person trained in corporate discipline manages even grief with a sense of proportion. She looked up at Warren. Her eyes were red, but dry. The bracelet was on her left wrist, and her right hand was resting on it, covering the lotus, as if she had been holding it since Diana told her what it meant. "I didn't know," she said. "I want you to understand that. I didn't know any of it. I know. Claudette and Jean-Pierre, they were good people. They loved me. They told me my birth parents died in the storm. I had no reason to question it. You don't have to explain. I do. Because I need to say it out loud so I can hear whether it sounds true." She paused. "They told me my name was Nadine. They told me I was born in Lafayette. They celebrated my birthday on April 12. None of that is real." Warren sat in the chair opposite the couch. The distance between them was 4 feet, close enough to reach, far enough to respect the space that 25 years of separation had carved between a father and a daughter who had become strangers without choosing to. "Your name is Celine," Warren said. "Celine Delphine Sable. You were born the 8th of June 2000 at Tulane University Medical Center. Your mother's name was Delphine. She named you after herself because she said one Delphine in the world wasn't enough." Nadine Celine listened. Her hand tightened on the bracelet. "The scar on your hand," Warren continued. "You were 3. You reached for a casting mold I had left, cooling on the workbench. I grabbed you, but not fast enough. Your mother drove us to the emergency room. She didn't speak to me for 2 days. She said I should have put the mold on a higher shelf. She was right. Something shifted in Nadine's expression, a recognition deeper than memory, deeper than fact. It was the recognition of a story that the body remembers, even when the mind has been told a different version. She looked at her left hand, at the scar she had carried for 22 years, and Warren saw the moment she understood that the scar was not a random mark, but a signature, the first thing her father's craft had ever written on her skin. She never forgave the mold, Warren said. But she forgave me. Eventually, Nadine almost smiled. It was not a full smile. It was the ghost of one. The preliminary sketch, before the finished engraving. But it was there. The bracelet, she said. You made 2. I made 2. Yours has the first 6 notes of When the Saints Go Marching In on the inside. Mine has your birth date. She turned the bracelet on her wrist and looked at the inside. 6 tiny notes engraved in silver. So small they were almost invisible. Preserved for 25 years against skin and soap and time. I never knew what the notes were, she whispered. I used to trace them with my fingernail before I fell asleep. Every night. Even when I didn't remember why. Warren's vision blurred. He did not wipe his eyes. Some moments deserve their full weight, undiminished by the instinct to compose oneself. Teresa Kingsley stood quietly and left the room. Diana Geneva followed, pulling the door closed behind her with the gentleness of someone who understood that what was happening inside was not part of the case file. It was the thing the case file had been built to reach. Father and daughter sat in the small office on Magazine Street, 4 feet apart, connected by a bracelet, a scar, and 6 notes of a song that had been waiting 25 years to be recognized. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The silence was not empty. It was full of everything that had been lost and everything that, against all probability, had survived. The trial began in March and lasted 11 days. Federal prosecutors presented their case in the Eastern District of Louisiana Courthouse on Poydras Street. A building Warren had passed 1,000 times without ever imagining he would sit inside it and watch the machinery of justice process the wreckage of his own family. Frank Hebert was tried first. The prosecution's case rested on 4 pillars. The falsified DHS Form 561S, the violation of the 72-hour reunification hold, the 20-year fraudulent investigation funded by Warren's payments, and the community reference affidavit supporting Celine's adoption. Mabel Torres testified on the second day. She wore a navy blue dress and the same orthopedic shoes she had worn in her kitchen in Slidell, and she spoke with the precision of a woman who had organized her memory the way she had once organized supply chains. Every detail cataloged, every date confirmed, every discrepancy noted. She described Frank's volunteer request for the UAM station, the 14 unaccompanied minors he processed, the 0% reunification rate, and the 48-hour transfer of UAM 061. When the prosecutor asked her why she had kept her records for 20 years, she said, "Because someone was going to ask. I didn't know when, but someone was going to ask." The defense argued that post-Katrina chaos made procedural errors inevitable and that Frank's actions, while irregular, did not constitute criminal intent. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned a guilty verdict on all counts: conspiracy to conceal the identity of a displaced minor, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. Frank Hebert was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison, 1 year for each child he had processed into a system designed to lose them. Darius's trial followed immediately. His case was more complex. The prosecution presented the 38 encrypted emails, the shadow server registered under Sable Heritage Digital in Delaware, the 2 wire transfers to Frank Hebert, and the Section 12.7 violation. Special Agent Diana Geneva testified about the coordinated nature of the conspiracy, describing how Darius had systematically kept Warren away from investor meetings where Nadine would be present and had authorized payments to Frank to retrieve and destroy DCFS records. The email, dated the 14th of June 2024, was read aloud in the courtroom. He cannot meet her. If he sees the bracelet, everything falls apart. Warren sat in the gallery and listened to his adopted son's words projected through speakers into a room full of strangers. The sentence hung in the air the way smoke hangs after a detonation, visible, acrid, refusing to dissipate. Darius did not testify. His attorney, a sharp litigator from Houston named Caldwell, argued that Darius had acted out of fear of losing the only family he had ever known, that his actions were driven not by greed, but by the terror of abandonment, the same terror that had shaped him since he was an 8-year-old orphan pulled from floodwater. Caldwell called a psychologist who testified about attachment disorders in post-disaster adopted children. The testimony was compelling. Warren watched the jury's faces and saw sympathy flicker across several of them. But sympathy is not acquittal. The jury deliberated for 9 hours longer than Frank's and returned guilty verdicts on conspiracy and wire fraud. They acquitted on obstruction, apparently accepting that Darius's concealment was motivated partly by psychological factors rather than pure criminal intent. The judge sentenced Darius to 8 years, with the possibility of reduction for cooperation. Warren attended every day of both trials. He sat in the same seat, third row, left side, aisle, and wore the same dark suit. He did not speak to reporters. He did not speak to Darius. On the day of Darius's sentencing, as the marshals led him from the courtroom, Darius turned and looked at Warren. Their eyes met for 3 seconds. Warren saw in that look something he had not seen in the boardroom. Not recognition, not calculation, but grief. The grief of a son who had loved his father and betrayed him simultaneously, holding both truths in the same hand the way a jeweler holds a stone and a setting, knowing they belong together, but unable to make them fit. Warren looked back. He did not nod. He did not look away. He held the gaze until Darius was through the door. And then he sat in the empty courtroom for 20 minutes, listening to the building settle around him. The Rosewood Cafe had become, without either of them planning it, the place where Warren and Nadine met. It was neutral ground, not his workshop, not her office, not the courthouse. A place with good coffee and brass fixtures and enough ambient noise to cushion the silences that still occurred when one of them accidentally stepped on a memory the other was not ready to share. They met there for the first time after the trial on a Saturday in April. Nadine arrived carrying a canvas bag. She ordered a cappuccino, the same drink, the same cup size, the same left-handed grip. Warren ordered black coffee. They sat at the corner table. "I brought something," she said. She reached into the canvas bag and placed a small wooden box on the table. Warren recognized it, not the box itself, but the craftsmanship. The hinges were hand-filed. The lid was sanded to a finish so smooth it reflected the overhead light like water. "I made it," Nadine said. "In my apartment, with tools I bought at a hardware store on Chupatulas. I watched videos online. It took me 3 weeks. It's not very good." Warren picked up the box. The hinges were slightly uneven. The sanding had left a faint, circular pattern on the lid where she had changed direction. The wood was cypress, Louisiana cypress, the kind that smells like rain and church pews. "It's very good," he said. She opened the box. Inside, resting on a piece of white cotton, was her bracelet, the silver bracelet, with the lotus and the 6 notes and the maker's mark. She had taken it off her wrist for the first time since Warren had seen it on television. "I want you to have it," she said. "Not forever. Just for now. I need to figure out who I am without it before I can understand who I am with it." Warren looked at the bracelet. 25 years ago, he had engraved it in his workshop for a daughter he was about to lose. Now that daughter was sitting across from him, offering it back in a box she had built with her own hands. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed his own bracelet on the table beside hers. The 2 bracelets lay side by side on the white cotton, identical in design, different in wear. Hers was polished smooth by 25 years of daily contact with skin. His was darker, oxidized, carrying the patina of a man who had opened a drawer every morning to look at it and closed the drawer every night without putting it on. "Trade," Warren said. Nadine looked at him. Then she picked up his bracelet, the one with her birth date engraved on the inside, and fastened it on her left wrist. Warren picked up hers, the one with the 6 notes, and held it in his palm. He did not put it on. He was not ready, but he closed his fingers around it. And the silver was warm from her skin, and the warmth traveled through his hand and up his arm and into a place behind his ribs where 25 years of cold had lived. "It fits," Nadine said, looking at his bracelet on her wrist. "It was always yours," Warren said. "The first 6 months were architecture. Not the kind built with blueprints and load-bearing walls, but the kind built with phone calls, text messages, Saturday lunches, and the slow, deliberate process of 2 people learning how to occupy the same emotional space without crowding each other." Nadine called every Wednesday evening at 7. Warren did not ask her to. She established the rhythm herself, the way she established rhythms in her company. Intentionally, consistently, with the understanding that reliability is the foundation on which everything else is built. The calls lasted between 20 and 45 minutes. In the beginning, they talked about safe things, the weather, the cafe, a documentary she had watched, a commission he was finishing. They orbited each other at a respectful distance, 2 celestial bodies adjusting to a shared gravitational field that neither had expected to enter. In May, she asked about Delphine. "Tell me about her." "Not the investigation. Her." Warren was sitting on the porch of his workshop, watching the evening light turn the French Quarter gold. He had been waiting for this question the way an engraver waits for the metal to reach the right temperature, knowing it will come, not knowing exactly when. "She was stubborn," he said. "More stubborn than me, which is saying something. She grew up in Treme, sang in her church choir until she was 17, then decided she wanted to be an accountant because she said music was beautiful, but numbers paid the rent. She put herself through Uno working nights at a hotel on Canal Street. She did the books for 12 small businesses in the quarter before she married me, and she kept doing them after because she said a woman should never let a man become her only column in the ledger." Nadine laughed. It was the first real laugh Warren had heard from her, not the polished, professional laugh from the Rosewood meeting, but a sound that came from the same place Delphine's laugh had come from, deep and sudden, like a bird startled into flight. "She sounds like someone I would have liked," Nadine said. "She would have liked you too. She would have been furious with you about something within the first week. She was always furious with people she loved, but she would have liked you." In June, Nadine came to the workshop for the first time. She stood in the doorway and looked at the benches, the tools, the brass ship's clock, the ventilation hood, the sage-green walls. She did not enter immediately. She stood on the threshold the way a person stands at the entrance of a cathedral, not from reverence, but from the awareness that the space inside holds something larger than its physical dimensions. "It smells like I remember," she said. Then she stopped, surprised by her own words. "I don't know why I said that. I don't have memories of this place." "Your body might," Warren said. "You were here every day for the first 5 years of your life. You used to sit on that stool," he pointed to the wooden stool beside the second bench, "and watch me work. You called the soldering iron the magic stick." Nadine walked to the stool and sat on it. She placed her hands on the bench, palms down, and closed her eyes. Warren watched her and saw, for a moment, the ghost of a 5-year-old girl superimposed on the 25-year-old woman, same posture, same tilt of the head, same way of pressing her palms flat, as if trying to read the surface through her skin. "Show me," she said. "Show me how you make something." Warren picked up a silver blank and a graver. He began a simple engraving, a single magnolia blossom, the kind he could carve in his sleep. As the tool moved through the metal, cutting clean lines that curled into petals, Nadine watched with an intensity that reminded him of Delphine watching him work in the early years of their marriage, when everything he made was a sentence in a conversation Only the two of them could hear. She came back every other Saturday after that. She did not engrave. She said her hands were built for spreadsheets, not silver. But she watched, asked questions, and occasionally held a piece steady while Warren worked. In July, she brought lunch. In August, she brought a photograph of Claudette and Jean-Pierre, her adoptive parents, and placed it on the workbench beside the photograph of Celine at age 4. They should be in the same room, she said. They're all part of the same story. Warren looked at the two photographs, his daughter at 4, smiling in a yellow sundress, and the couple who had raised her, standing in front of a white house in Lafayette, squinting into the sun. He had spent months preparing himself to resent them, but resentment requires a villain, and the Oliviers had loved Celine as Nadine with the fullness of parents who believed she was theirs to love. They had not stolen her. They had received her through a system that told them she was available, and they had given her everything they had. They belong here, Warren said. He placed the photograph next to Delphine's green lamp in the back room and did not move it again. The text message arrived on a Tuesday in October. At 6:47 inches the morning, while Warren was opening the workshop. It was from Nadine's number. It contained one word, Dad. Warren read it, standing in the doorway, the key still in the lock, the morning light falling across Chartres Street in long amber stripes. One word, 3 letters, a syllable he had not heard directed at him by his biological child in 25 years. He did not respond immediately. He walked to his bench, sat on his stool, and placed the phone face up on the wooden surface. The screen glowed with the single word. He looked at it the way he looked, at a finished engraving, checking for flaws, testing whether the lines held, whether the piece was complete. It was complete. He picked up the phone and typed his response. 2 words. Good morning. It was not poetic. It was not dramatic. It was the response of a man who understood that the most important moments do not require eloquence. They require presence. Dad was not a conclusion. It was an opening. A door held ajar by 3 letters, inviting him to walk through. And the proper response to an open door is not to rush through it but to step forward gently, acknowledging the threshold. She called that Wednesday at 7, as she always did. But this time, when he answered, she did not say, "Hi, Warren." She said, "Hi, Dad." And Warren heard in those 2 syllables the sound of a circuit closing the circuit Delphine had begun in the back room with her letters, that Luke had traced through FEMA records and shelter logs, that Mabel had preserved in a banker's box, that Renata had collected in a cappuccino cup, and that Diana Geneva had carried into a courtroom. The circuit was complete. The current was flowing, and the warmth it generated was not dramatic or explosive. It was the quiet warmth of silver, held in a palm, small, steady, and enduring. "Hi, sweetheart," Warren said. On a Saturday in December, 1 year after the PBS broadcast that had changed everything, Warren Sable sat at his workbench and began the most important commission of his career. The client was himself. The piece was a display case, hand-carved cypress, lined with white velvet, designed to hold 2 silver bracelets side by side. He worked slowly. There was no deadline, no client approval, no quarterly meeting waiting at the end of the process. He selected the cypress from a plank he had been saving for 11 years, wood salvaged from a house in the lower 9th Ward that had been destroyed by Katrina and rebuilt by volunteers in 2014. The wood carried the waterline in its grain, a faint discoloration 3 feet from the base where the flood had held its breath before receding. Most craftsmen would have sanded the mark away. Warren left it. Some scars are not flaws. They are evidence that a thing survived. He cut the joints by hand, no power tools, no shortcuts. Dovetails at the corners, a piano hinge along the back, a small brass clasp at the front, shaped like an anchor. The interior he lined with velvet he had purchased from a fabric shop on Decatur Street, the same shop where Delphine had bought material for Celine's. The shop had changed owners twice since then, but the velvet was the same, soft, white, with a nap that held light the way still water holds a reflection. Nadine arrived at the workshop at noon. She brought lunch from the Rosewood, 2 sandwiches, 2 coffees, a slice of pecan pie. They would split the way they had been splitting things for 6 months, not because either of them needed to share, but because sharing had become the grammar of their relationship, the small syntax through which 2 strangers were learning to become family. She set the bag on the second bench and looked at the display case. "What's it for?" Warren opened the case. The 2 compartments sat empty, side by side, each one shaped to cradle a bracelet. He reached into his jacket and removed Nadine's bracelet, the one with the lotus and the 6 notes, the one she had given him at the Rosewood in April. He placed it in the left compartment. Then, he held out his hand. Nadine understood. She unfastened the bracelet. She was wearing Warren's bracelet, the one with Celine's birth date, and placed it in his palm. He set it in the right compartment and closed the lid. The 2 bracelets lay side by side beneath the glass, separated by a thin ridge of cypress, united by the same silver, the same maker's mark, the same hands that had engraved them in the summer of 2000. "I want to put it in the back room," Warren said, "next to Delphine's lamp and the photographs. So everything is in one place." Nadine picked up the case and carried it herself. She walked through the workshop past the benches, the flux tins, the acid bottles, the brass ship's clock, and into the back room, where Delphine had written 47 letters to a husband who would not read them for 12 years. She placed the case on the desk, between the green lamp and the 2 photographs. Celine at 4 in a yellow sundress, and Claudette and Jean-Pierre squinting into the Lafayette sun. She stepped back and looked at the arrangement. Lamp, photographs, bracelets. The complete inventory of a family that had been scattered by a hurricane, buried by paperwork, and reassembled by a flux tin, a retired FBI agent, a forensic technician with a paperback novel, and a woman in Slidell who had painted a waterline on her mailbox so she would not forget. "The lotus grows from mud," Nadine said. Warren looked at her. "Where did you hear that?" "It's engraved on the bracelet. On the outside, below the lotus. 4 words, so small I didn't see them until I was 16, and looked at the bracelet under a magnifying glass. I didn't know what they meant. I thought it was a jeweler's motto." Warren shook his head. "It's something your mother said. When I asked her why she wanted a lotus on a baby's bracelet, instead of something simpler, a star. A heart, she said. The lotus grows from mud. She said she wanted you to know that beautiful things come from difficult places, that the origin doesn't determine the outcome." Nadine touched the glass of the display case. Beneath it, the lotus was visible on the left bracelet, its petals curving outward in fine silver lines. And beneath the petals, in letters so small they were almost invisible, the 4 words Delphine had chosen for a daughter she would spend the rest of her life trying to find. "She was right," Nadine said. They stood together in the back room for a long time. The green lamp cast its circle of light. The photographs watched. The bracelets rested in their velvet compartments, catching the light and holding it the way silver does, not absorbing, not reflecting, but carrying it, transforming it into something warmer and softer than the original source. Outside, the French Quarter was doing what it always does on a Saturday in December living. Brass bands played on Royal Street. Tourists wandered through Jackson Square. The smell of beignets drifted from Café du Monde, mixing with river air and the faint sweetness of magnolia. The city that Katrina had tried to drown was still breathing, still singing, still building itself out of the mud it had been born from. Warren closed the backroom door, but did not lock it. He would never lock it again. The room was no longer a shrine to what had been lost. It was a record of what had been found. They ate lunch at the workbench. Nadine sat on the stool she had sat on as a child, and Warren sat on his stool. And they split the pecan pie with a bench knife because neither of them could find a clean fork. Nadine laughed, the real laugh, the Delphine laugh, and Warren heard in it the sound of a song he had engraved in silver 25 years ago, finally being sung aloud. "When the saints go marching in," the first 6 notes. The ones she had traced with her fingernail every night before sleep. The ones that had waited on the inside of a bracelet through 3 foster homes, 1 group facility, 1 sealed adoption, 1 invented birthday, 1 borrowed name, and 25 years of not knowing, waited with the patience of silver, which does not rust, does not decay, does not forget. It only tarnishes. And tarnish can be polished away. This story was inspired by true events but is entirely fictional. All names, characters, organizations, and incidents are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. If you or someone you know has information about a missing child displaced by a natural disaster, contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THELOST, 1-800-843-5678, or visit www.missingkids.org. If this story moved you, leave the word Lotus in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear that beautiful things can grow from difficult places. And subscribe so you don't miss the next story.